Hi everyone, welcome to part 4. Okay, we've just seen this mistake that white could have potentially played if he'd played knight takes g6 check, but Carlsen, as I said, played rook f2. And Aronian continued with the rook d6 to defend the g pawn. And Carlsen continued with an amazing move, bishop c1, which is, shows incredibly strong calculating ability, and as before is a computer-like move. And it's easily the best in the position, but it's very hard to spot, especially because it appears that white is dropping a rook here. And if you want, you can stop the video here and try and figure out exactly what it is Carlsen is up to, and it takes very, very deep calculating abilities, and well, if you can see what he's doing here, is very, very impressive. So apparently, yeah, white is dropping a rook. After rook takes f2, king takes f2, and rook takes d1, which Aronian played, but this is a blunder, and Carlsen will be able to win both the black knight and the bishop here tactically with his knight and bishops. Pretty incredible. Better was king g7 for black, but after rook takes d6, bishop takes d6, the endgame is still worse for black, but he can struggle on here. Let's see, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 3. He's going to win the f pawn, so he's a pawn down, so it's going to be a struggle, but it's preferable, I think, to the game continuation. At the very least, there must be drawing chances here. So next comes an amazing sequence from Carlsen that shows he has superb tactical as well as positional strength after this rook takes d1 from Aronian. So the first move in the combination is pretty obvious, bishop b2 check, and this is the point of his earlier bishop c1 to take control of this diagonal, and he's given up a rook in order to create this combination. And due to the pawn here on f7, black has only one viable move, knight f6. If instead bishop g7, knight takes g6 is mate, so that's no good. So knight f6, so simply bishop takes f6 check, and now white is only the exchange down, but he has two pawns for it and a very strong initiative. As I said, he can win this bishop tactically. The only move again for black is king h7. If bishop g7, then the pawn queens would check, and the bishop can't take it because it's pinned by the white bishop. So king h7 only move, queen takes g7 is mate. So king h7 is the only move, and Carlsen had to see all this long before when he played rook f2 and bishop c1. He had to calculate all of this, so it shows incredible foresight and calculating abilities. Because now at knight e6 again is the only move, to retain the advantage, and it's going to win the bishop. Because it attacks the bishop, it prepares to queen, and it also prevents bishop c5 check, which is an important note. If that was playable, then white could easily get into trouble here. And so again, the only move for black is bishop d6. Playing instead rook d2 check is an obvious blunder after king e1, and black is losing a piece and the game quickly. There is one other move that's possible instead of bishop d6, which is bishop h6, but then comes knight g5 check, and it's absolutely diabolical for black. So bishop d6, and now white can simply queen the pawn, the bishop will take, and white will be two pieces up, but there's a little finesse to the position that's very important for white to play, which is bishop e5. Another very nice move from Carlsen. Threatens knight g5 check and a mating net, and this is better than queening immediately, as doing so would leave the white pieces perilously close to the black king and give white some problems to solve before progressing further. We can have a quick look. If queening, then bishop takes f8, knight takes f8, king g8, and the knight is attacked. Bishop e7 is the best way to deal with this, and though white is still winning, his advantage is less than after Carlsen's bishop e5, because in this line knight takes g5 isn't possible. Sorry, knight takes g6 or king f7, you know, and white's losing a piece, and this move won't be possible. It won't work, you know, if the bishop is on e5 instead, which is what Carlsen ensured by playing bishop e5 before queening. And you know, at every stage of the game, Carlsen just plays with superb accuracy. So bishop e5, and so bishop e7, and obviously if instead bishop takes e5, and then the pawn queens, and it's of course totally winning. And as before, there's nothing to be gained in the check on d2. It achieves nothing. So bishop e5 and bishop e7, and only now does the pawn queen. And so bishop takes, obviously, and now knight takes f8 check. And because the bishop is on e5, the attack on the g6 pawn is genuine. So if king g8 now, then knight takes g6 is possible. So king h6 is the only move, and Carlsen's incredible calculating skills means he has won 2 pieces for his rook and is presented with a winning endgame. It's also a pawn up. You know, there are still some problems to solve here, and white's strategy from this point is clear. He can pick on the weak b4 pawn and then advance his queenside pawns to victory. And you know, his a pawn might drop off thanks to the rook, but this shouldn't matter. So in order to make this plan happen, the knight needs to get back into the game in order to attack the b pawn, and it can do this from c6, which it can reach by going knight e6, knight d4, knight c6, and Carlsen executed this maneuver immediately with knight e6, which effectively comes with tempo, because bishop f4 check is threatened, and there's no g5 because it's controlled by these pieces if the bishop is on f4. And you know, after the king moves, the king side can be locked up, and Aronian will want this area to be active so he can get counterplay and, you know, create his own chances. So he answered after knight e6 with g5, which gives Carlsen the opportunity to resolve the pawn situation here, which he did with h4, which pretty much forces g takes h4 if black wants any chances here on the king side. So g takes h4, and now Aronian got his king active with king g6, which is threatening king f5, winning a piece. So knight d4, which is getting one move closer to the c6 square, 2, and Aronian continued with the rook d3, keeping some pressure on the knight and trying to make life as difficult as possible for Carlsen. He can play instead rook d2 check, and after king e3, rook takes a2, but after bishop f4, with bishop g5 coming next, white will again have a free hand on the queen side. So rook d3, and now knight c6, taking the pressure away from the rook and attacking the b4 pawn, and this is the desired square. And black has no way to defend his b pawn, so he may as well win the a pawn. And Aronian went for it with rook d2 check, and after king e3, rook takes a2. And white has to be careful here now. If he snaps off the pawn immediately with knight takes b4, then rook a3 will follow, and black is going to win the b pawn, and after that he'll have good drawing chances. And the way to prevent this is with bishop d6, which is what Carlsen played. And you know, taking the pawn with the bishop means that rook a3 of course is not possible, and that will mean, you know, that it can just be won freely and the pawn can advance, and it looks like a winning endgame for white. And you know, as throughout the entire game, Carlsen is playing with great care and skill. You know, it's very impressive and instructive. And Aronian continued with the rook a1, which again keeps as much pressure as possible on the white position, because the rook can swing anywhere along the first rank, and there's lots of threats to consider and tactical problems to take into account when choosing which move to play. And it's important to note too that he can't play rook a6 hoping to win a piece, or white simply plays knight e7 check, and after king f7 bishop takes b4, and he remains well ahead. So rook a1, and now Carlsen plays king d4, which is bringing his king over to the queen side to help the advance of his soon to be passed b pawn, and he's correctly judged that this is the best place. So next came rook g1, threatening rook g4 check, winning the h pawn. So Carlsen played king c5, and if rook g5 now, then knight e5 check is going to win the rook in the game. So Aronian in turn played king f5, and now Carlsen finally snapped off the pawn with knight takes b4, and things are starting suddenly to look bad for black, if only optically. The passed b pawn now appears to give white a definite winning advantage. Aronian still has chances, however, and Carlsen must be careful not to allow the draw. Even in a position with such reduced material, there are many tricks and traps to watch out for. Aronian continued with the rook c1 check, and after king d4 he played rook e1. Rook d1 check achieves little after knight d3. So rook e1, and now knight c6, simply preparing the advance of the b pawn. Knight d3 also achieved this, but came with some instinctual tactical danger with all of these pieces on the d file. And the downside of the knight moving to c6 instead is that it allows rook e4 check, and after king d5 rook takes h4. But once again Carlsen has judged the position with great accuracy and retains his huge edge after simply b4. And Aronian played rook h1, again giving the rook maximum flexibility along the first rank, and preparing the advance of his own pass pawn. Carlsen continued with b5. Next came rook b1, preventing the advancing of the b pawn and making space for the h pawn to queen. Carlsen can protect the pawn with check, knight d4, and this is the best move by far. Again, accuracy was required. The careless king c5 instead allows black to draw with the rook c1 check, king b6, h4, king c7, and king e6, with king d5 coming next in the event of b6, which, you know, one must be so careful at all stages of the game. We're at move 61 now, and one tiny slip and everything that white has built up will be lost. So knight d4 check, king g4, king c6, and with this move white's advantage is suddenly growing and now bordering on 4 pawns, so it's not looking good for black. Aronian threw in a check with rook c1, but now king d7 and white's aim is clear. Aronian continued correctly with rook b1, which is further prophylaxis, of course. Playing instead rook d1 is losing after b6, allowing the knight to drop. If rook takes d4, b7, and black cannot stop the pawn from queening, the bishop is controlling b4. So obviously that's no good. So rook b1, but now king c7, and the king is going to shepherd home the pawn, and in the event of rook c1 check, white can play knight c6 and he's fine. Black has a passed pawn of his own, however, and it's time to start pushing it further. So Aronian played h4, and the problem for white is that even if he queens his pawn and black gives up the rook, he will have to stop the h pawn somehow, and if it's allowed to queen and white exchanges it, for example for one of his pieces, he will be left with a king and a minor piece, and it will be impossible to mate the black king. Carlsen must factor this into all of his calculations. For now it's still safe to push, as black cannot advance his pawn further than h3 without it being taken by the bishop here on h2. So b6, now king h3, the black king prepares to come to g2 and support the advance of the pawn, but b7 is starting to look very, very bad for black. So king g2, and now knight f5 threatens to take the pawn, so h3 is the only way to save it. Another interesting try, the kind of thing that white has to look out for, is rook takes b7 check. Now after king takes b7, h3, and you know, how is white stopping this pawn from queening? But again, as in the game, knight h4 check is winning for white, as after, for example, king f1, white can bring his king over to round up the pawn. Black can't push in because the bishop is covering h2, and if instead king g1, white can again bring his king down with like king c6 because of the tactic after h2 knight f3 check and the winning of the crucial h pawn. And after knight h4 there is in fact no way to queen the pawn, and after realizing this, Aronian finally resigned. If we return to the game continuation, after h3 knight h4 check, this is the aesthetic final position, and white indeed has an advantage now of over 5 pawns, so you know, it's curtains. Play might continue, for example, king f2 and king c6 is easily winning, or if otherwise king g1, b8 queen, rook takes b8, king takes b8, and we have the same position that we just saw. And you know, admittedly it will be difficult for white to force the mate with knight and bishop, and it's a wonder that Aronian didn't make Carlsen play it out, as it's easy to go wrong, and 1 or 2 inaccuracies will mean a violation of the 50 move rule. But after facing such play, it's no surprise that he'd had enough. So it was a superb display from Carlsen throughout the entire game. Not only his positional, prophylactic and tactical strength was profound, but also his endgame play was fantastic. We can have a quick replay with the threatened squares on, just to see the game from start to finish without the side variations, which is a good thing to do, I think. So it was Queen's Gambit declined by transposition, with the exchange here on d5, which is one of the reasons knight f6 is popular, because it bolsters this d5 square. Like a lot of the early pressure in Queen's Gambit declined lines revolves around white's chances to create an isolated pawn in the black position, amongst other things, you know, the tempo for the bishop development and so on. But as we can see here, Carlsen's central control, especially after f3 and e4, just gradually builds, and we'll be able to see by the threatened squares where the pressure exists in the position. And naturally at the moment it's all in the center. This is where most of the play is, and these hanging pawns prove to be absolutely a dynamic strength for white, as opposed to a weakness, which they can also be. And look at the pressure here on a5. Ultimately that will be decisive as far as the game's concerned. And you know, Aronian got some initiative here for his sacrifice pawn, but as we saw, it wasn't enough, especially after knight takes a7. Look at all the highlighted squares that come into life now. And suddenly the king is in danger. It'd be nice to see Carlsen's combination coming up now. It's absolutely incredible calculating abilities, especially knight d6 and bishop e5. Absolutely brilliant parts of the combination. And this endgame now is just, you know, strategically winning. It's not completely winning, but it is strategically winning. The judgment about the creation of the pass pawn here, and also the locking of the king side pawns, in order to make it, you know, difficult for black to get play there, which he did achieve eventually. But Carlsen's judgment was absolutely perfect in calculating how to approach the endgame and the best squares for the pieces and all that kind of thing. Very, very impressive play, especially against someone like Aronian, you know, who's a player that the entire chess world has huge respect for, and he's not that far behind Carlsen on the rating lists, and yeah, he's definitely a future World Championship contender. There's absolutely no doubt. It would be brilliant to see a World Championship between these two. And that's the final position after knight h4, which is a very aesthetic and nice position too. So it was an absolutely incredible game from Carlsen, and I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave any comments or thoughts. Thanks very much.